Okay, here we go with some self-management. All right, first off, we need to define this. Now, there's a couple of issues here that we're going to run into, and they're briefly covered in your book. It's just not as good as what I was hoping it would be in terms of covering all the little details. So I'm going to go into it a little further so you can kind of understand some of the issues here. So first off, let's just define it, right? And then we'll get into the problem. So self-management, right off the bat, we're using behavior modification procedures to change your own behavior. Quite simply, it just means that all these things that we've learned about throughout the course, we can apply to our own behavior. Right? Some of them are much more difficult to apply than others, and some of them are pretty straightforward. But in general, we can use all the procedures we've talked about, from token economies to establishing operations to differential reinforcement to punishment. We can use all those in a self-management procedure. Right? So we ask the question: why not why self-management? Why not self-control or willpower? Well, very simply, self-control and willpower create a situation of reification. Now, reification is where you take something abstract and treat it as real. So the term willpower is actually an abstract thing. It doesn't really exist. But when we use it in the English language, we tend to use it as a noun, which means that we have then reified it. Right? So we took this thing that's a hypothetical or an abstract, and we created something out of that. So when you do that, that's called reification, and it's a logical failure. Right? It's not appropriate to do that. So, for example, let's look at this sentence. Tox is the guy's name. So Tox has a lot of willpower. Makes sense, right? Seems like it does. That's because we're reifying the word willpower. The problem here is that it's not an accurate statement. The same thing happens with self-control. Tusu has a lot of self-control. Right? It seems like it's something you can have or not have. You can buy it, you can sell it. It's a commodity, that type of thing. But it doesn't. That's not actually what it is. And the problem when you start to use self-control and willpower, when you reify those and you use that term as a noun, then the issue is that it gets you away from the focus on what the behavior really is, or what self-management really is. It gets you away from thinking about skills, and it gets you thinking about something you have or don't have. And that automatically gives you a way out in terms of changing your behavior, and that's not what we're after, and it's not an accurate description anyway. So if we say the following sentence, though, Kutsia has a lot of self-management. It seems like it's lacking, right? So Kutsia has a lot of self-management. What? Well, self-management skills. Right? Now we get that focus on where it should be, and we're not reifying self-management. Self-management becomes an adjective for skills, right? So you have a lot of self-management skills. It's something that you can do. You can, if it's a skill, of course, you can learn a skill, and skills take practice. So there's a lot of implications behind changing the term from self-control to self-management. Now, there's some argument throughout history. I mean, Skinner used the term self-control. Brigham used the term self-management. I prefer self-management. Of course, Brigham was my advisor, so that's. I mean, I think it's just a much better approach, and it prevents the reification thing, and I think that's an excellent way to go. Okay. These things are all ways in which we describe the self-control behavior. So if you hear these types of statements, behave today to manage behavior tomorrow, or take action now to prevent problems later, or a little effort now for a larger gain later, those types of things, that's all talking about self-management. Right? So it's not like this is a completely new concept. I mean, we're all well aware of these types of things. We talk about them. But the trick is, how do we actually select for these responses? How do we make this stuff happen? And on the surface, it seems easy, but it's actually quite a challenge, as most of you would know by this point, because you've been working on your self-change plans. Okay. Right off the bat, we need to know that there's two components, a controlling behavior and a controlled behavior. So if you're trying to reduce your cigarette smoking, the cigarette smoking is the controlled behavior. Okay, that's the controlled behavior is the target behavior. That's the one you're trying to change, right? And the controlling behavior is the self-management response. Right? So when you're trying to control your behavior, then that action of what you're doing to control a particular behavior is the self-management stuff. So controlling behavior is what the person does now. In other words, managing the antecedents and the consequences of the controlled behavior, right? To the behavior the person wants to manage in the future. I don't like the fact I put the word future here. I think it's better described as, like what I said a moment ago, that the controlling behavior is what you're doing to manage the behavior that you want to change. Of course, we can talk about learning new behaviors, so you can emit controlling behaviors now in order to select for new responses. You can do some shaping, you can do some chaining, you can do all sorts of stuff there. So it's not just a behavior that you may want to reduce or increase. It may be something that you want to start doing altogether. Maybe you want to go learn to play golf. I mean, that's a new behavior for some of us. And maybe that's just so you would have the controlled behavior then as the golf playing, and whatever you're doing to select that golf playing to make it happen is going to be your controlling behavior. Of course, we got a couple of different problems that exist in self-management. First one is a behavioral deficit, pretty straightforward. Failure to perform a desirable behavior. Hold on, gotta let out the pup. Good girl. Did you ring the bell? Yeah. All right. Good girl. Well, I'm recording videos at home. Anyway, let's see. Where were we at? Behavioral deficits refers to the failure to perform the desirable behavior. So a self-management goal, increase behavioral level, so it is no longer a deficit. So are you not saving enough money? Are you not drinking enough water? Are you not eating enough vegetables? Well, you've got a behavioral deficit. Behavioral excess refers to the consistent performance of an undesirable behavior. So obviously the self-management goal here is going to be to decrease that. You can figure out what, you can apply this all over the show. And in fact, most of you in class, historically, not just in this class, but in all my classes, typically choose a behavioral excess that they like to reduce. So reducing procrastination, reducing nail biting, reducing smoking. But a large number of people also do stuff with regard to exercise or something like that. So that's working on a behavioral deficit. But typically, behavioral excesses are what we often target first. It's kind of the first thing we often think about. Ooh, I'm doing this and I don't like it, so I'm going to get rid of it. That type of thing. So in general, we're going to break all these things down as we go on, but ultimately self-management just involves a few things here. Identifying and defining the target behavior, using a behavior mod procedure to develop alternative behaviors or reduce or increase other ones. Okay. Let me go back to that, sorry. So using behavior mod to develop alternative behaviors, but this also means about reducing and or increasing behaviors. So it's really that simple. Identify and define it, and then use your procedures. Okay, yeah, but how do you use the procedures, right? That's part of the fun here. And how you use the procedures is what we're going to go into next. Okay. Here's your 7 steps. Set your goals. Okay, don't make those goals fuzzy. All right, if they're fuzzy, unfuzzify them. All right, so get rid of those general statements. I want to do better in school. And that doesn't cut it. You need to state what you want to do and make it behavioral. Okay, start your self-monitoring program. Right, so right off the bat, you need to start recording the behavior. Oftentimes, that will get the behavior to change right there. And so, self-monitor. Set up a system to self-monitor. You can all those other procedures that we talked about for recording behavior apply here. Next thing we want to think about is what sort of antecedents can we manipulate? In other words, what can we change in our environment? Can we change discriminative stimuli? Can we add some discriminative stimuli? Can we remove some discriminative stimuli? So if exercise is one of your goals or increasing exercise, maybe you can set out your gym clothes the night before. I once had a student who was attempting to lose weight, and that was kind of his broad goal, and he narrowed that down into some unfuzzy goals, or got actually goals and not outcomes. And one of the things he talked about was playing basketball, and his simple thing to do was take the basketball and put it by the door. Right? So he just took the basketball when he'd get home from school, he'd set it by the door, and that would cue him. It was a visual cue, a discriminative stimulus to go play, and he ended up losing quite a bit of weight by the end of the quarter. Establish a contract with yourself and possibly others if needed. Right? Using consequences, set up your reinforcers, set up your punishers. Right? Establish some social support. In other words, make that contract public, make your goals public, and see if you can get help from friends and family. Right? And definitely use a lot of self-instruction. Now, I prefer self-instruction over self-praise because there's a lot more evidence supporting self-instruction. Self-praise is great, but it's something that you probably already have a lot of. It's really easy to give yourself praise constantly, so it's not a great sort of consequence to use, but it's not going to hurt anything, that's for sure. It's just that it doesn't have as much empirical support at changing behavior as compared to self-instructions. So let's look at goal setting a little further. Write everything down. Write the target behavior down, write the criterion level, and write in what time you want to achieve it. Right? Do you want to be reading 1 book a month by the end of summer? or one book a week by the end of the summer, right? That type of thing. So reading is the target behavior, criterion level is completing the book, and the time frame is by the end of summer. The beauty of goal setting is it can produce reactivity effects. In other words, it can get you to just start doing stuff automatically. So sometimes setting the goal is enough to change the behavior. Not always, and you don't want to just plan at that point. But the idea is you want to build your whole plan. But oftentimes, just setting the goal can make you successful. Right? But it's typically, of course. But it is typically unaffected by itself. Sometimes it happens. You can take advantage of the reactivity to start to, hopefully it gets you in touch with some of those contingencies that are out there. Maybe trapped behavior. And if you'll recall, trapping is when you artificially set up a response to then come in contact with a natural reinforcer. So sometimes goal setting will do that. It's just not always going to happen. Right? So we often, I don't tell people to just set goals and you're done. No, you go on and you do a whole bunch of other stuff here. Set goals that are achievable. Don't make them unrealistic. Right? Especially true early in a change program. In other words, small successes. A lot of times people give up on their change programs because they don't achieve their desired goals. And why didn't they achieve their desired goals? Probably because their goals were too big. So you start out small and then ramp them up. Okay, so if your goal is to study more, or that's an awful goal, but you get the idea. We would set that some very achievable goals. So on the first day, I'm going to study for 30 minutes, and do that for the first couple of days, and then in the third, fourth, and fifth days, I'm going to study for 45 minutes, and then the sixth, seventh, eighth days, I'm going to study for an hour, so on and so forth. So set those goals, all right, and make them achievable. Ultimately, what's going to happen here is that you're probably going to be pairing goals with some sort of reinforcer. So what happens, so once you achieve your goal, you're going to get a reinforcer, but then also that becomes something new, is that the goal achievement itself can become a conditioned reinforcer. So part of goal setting behavior is that once you start setting goals regularly and achieving them, then setting the goal and achieving the goal can be a reinforcer in and to itself. So the more you practice with this goal setting stuff, the more effective it becomes. Self-monitor and track your own stuff, right? Typically combine this with goal setting. It's useful to use alone, but why not add a goal to it, right? Especially if you're talking about interventions here. But self-monitoring itself can be a very effective procedure, and it definitely produces reactivity in the sense that you will be... it serves as a discriminative stimulus for how much change you've already done, or to keep changing, so to speak. And it also can serve as a reinforcer when you record this stuff that okay, I've already changed and I can see that change. So that's that reactivity effect, and it can also often be self-reinforcing. In fact, I know of several people throughout the years that have started a change plan, and all they did was record behavior. And they had a full intervention plan, but their behavior started to change right away, just under a baseline condition. And great, that's awesome. Play with it, go with it, have fun. Right? So if you're seeing reactivity like that and it's going in the direction you want, don't stop what you're doing. Your intervention is working. Right? So let's look at some of those antecedent manipulations. All right? Right off the bat, we need to set this up. Always. You always do this in a self-management plan. And antecedent manipulations involve actually changing something in the environment. It doesn't mean, typically speaking, we're not going to talk about thoughts here. We're talking about physical changes to your environment. And so we're going to look at 3 strategies for increasing desirable behavior. In other words, we're going to create new SDs. Think of the kid that did the basketball thing, right? So he set out that basketball by the door. That was a new discriminative stimulus, and it was a physical change in the environment. Arranging, establishing operations. Right? So again, deprive yourself of something in order to make the reinforcers more valuable. So if you are wanting to play basketball, but you also really enjoy going to the movies, well, reduce the amount of times you spend at the movies and make it contingent upon playing basketball. Right? And a decreasing response effort. Make it easy for yourself to go to the basketball court. Right? Choose a exercise place or something that's near the house or near where your dorm is or whatever. The idea is you don't want to make it too difficult to basically prevent you from going. And of course, we also have 3 steps for decreasing undesirable behavior. They're all the same type of thing, just in reverse. Right? Remove discriminative stimuli. Right? So we're going to remove those things that cue responses. So if you're trying to reduce cigarette smoking, remove the ashtrays from the house. Right? Remove establishing operations. In other words, satiate. Right? Now, I wouldn't talk about satiation with cigarette smoking, but there's other situations where that may apply. Right? Increasing response effort. Make it harder to achieve your goal. This is a common one with cigarette smoking that people often choose to do, is they make it more difficult to get the cigarettes. They leave them in the car, or they leave them in a spot that is not easy to access. They separate the lighter from the cigarettes. They move the ashtrays outside, so on and so forth. So there's all sorts of things you can do to increase response effort. In fact, this is going to date this lecture a little bit, but Mayor Bloomberg, just yesterday, I believe, signed into law, or I don't know if it's actually signed in yet or not. Anyway, there's going to be a law in New York City about no restaurants can sell sodas that are larger than 16 ounces, right? So that kills all those supersized 96-ounce drinks and things like that. And the idea is to try and prevent, or they're trying to at least get a handle on some of these obesity issues and making it less likely to occur with soda, right? With consuming so much soda. So ultimately, what Mayor Bloomberg has done is he's decreasing undesirable behavior, or he's changing discriminative stimuli, right? He's making it really hard to get those 44-ounce drinks or whatever they may be, and it applies to restaurants and movie theaters and fast food and things like that. So he's really, or the city of New York is really taking a step to increase this response effort to make it harder to get those things that are, in this case, bad for you. All right, let's look at some of these contracts. It is a written document. It is not a verbal statement. All right, you have to write it. Specify the target behavior. Identify what the consequences are for achieving the target behavior and failing to achieve it. Okay? And it has to be detailed, and it needs to be signed. All right, one of the things I don't have on here is the signature. Signing the darn thing tends to make it more effective. Right? At least that's what the research says. Right? So self-management enters the picture when the controlling behavior, writing the contract, attempts to manage the controlled behavior, the target behavior. And ultimately, this contract itself, if well written, is part of your self-change plan. Okay? So when you're doing your recording, then you're establishing this behavioral contracts, and again, don't forget to sign the behavioral contract. The other thing that I like to tell people to do is posting it in a public place. Right? You can do it by yourself, or you can do it with a contract manager, right? But make sure a contract manager, just another person that's going to kind of hold you accountable for following your procedures. They're not going to implement other stuff. They're not going to punish you and reinforce you for failing, right? Or being successful. They're just going to make sure that you follow your plan. Unless, of course, you build that person in as part of your plan. But the point is that you can use another person. Right? Watch out, because this can backfire on you, especially with friends and things like that, because oftentimes you're wanting to reduce a problem behavior, and a lot of times that involves social issues. And if you're trying to get a contract manager to help you out, and they may actually be punished for helping you because they're losing access to you or something like that. So it can be difficult to use another person, but it's not a bad idea. And like I said, make it public. Okay. Short-circuiting the contract is an easy thing to do. You can cheat on reinforcers, and you can avoid punishers. But all you're doing is cheating yourself. You're not hurting anybody else. All right? So it's that's part of the signing thing, is making a commitment to yourself that you're not going to do that. Right? And a contract manager can help you a bit, but again, that's not 100% their role. You can short-circuit it. It's just something that you're going to have to do you're going to have to really work to make sure that doesn't happen. And that's actually, I think, in my opinion, the hardest part of a self-change plan, is not short-circuiting your self-change plan. So this is contingency management without the contract, right? So sans the contract. So you can reinforce and punish, all right, particular behavior. I would, why not? I mean, you're going to want to select for appropriate responses. I like to use token economy sometimes in self-change plans. It's a little bit of work on the front end, but on the back end, it pays off pretty well. You can do all sorts of stuff for yourself and things like that, and it's really easy to keep track of those points. And keeping track of the points that you earn or the tokens that you earn can be a sort of fun behavior in and to itself. We're going to talk about positive negative reinforcement, positive negative punishment. Right? You don't need anybody else in order to make this happen. You can set up situations where you can reinforce yourself. It's hard to do, and it's easy to short circuit, right? But it is possible to make it happen. So again, how do you prevent the short circuiting? Have another person implement the consequences. Again, watch out because you need to make sure that that person gets reinforced for helping you and not punished for helping you. So this can be a challenge. Others may be unwilling. Conflicts can arise, like I was telling you about with the social stuff. Maybe you're trying to reduce your drinking and increase your studying behavior. Well, and you're going to use your friend to help you out with that. And then, of course, that means that you're going to probably reduce access to your friend in the social settings. So therefore, they're likely to be punished for helping you in the self-change plan because they're losing access to you. So that's a negative punisher for their behavior. So this becomes a problem if you're using other folks. But you just have to be ready for that. You have to talk about it. You have to plan for those types of things ahead of time and maybe even build in some reinforcers with that person that you may be losing contact with. And that can be part of the self-change plan itself, is that you're going to spend some time with your behavior manager, one-on-one, maybe hanging out, going for a hike, going to a movie or something like that. Because if you're trying to reduce drinking behavior or partying behavior or whatever, then you're going to be losing access to that person. A lot of times we can set up social support for SD in terms of SDs, right? And we can set up social support in terms of consequences, right? The idea here is that you tell people what you're doing with your plan, and they can help remind you that your plan is going. This is about making the change plan public. Facebook's a great way to do this nowadays because you've got all sorts of people that are going to say, hey, good job, keep it up, how's it going? They're going to ask you, they're going to remind you that you're on a self-change plan, telling your friends that you're on a self-change plan. They can help remind you, right? Of course, the consequences, they can help with the consequences as well. In fact, when I first quit smoking cigarettes, one of my buddies, he noticed. I never told anybody. I just stopped smoking. I didn't make it public, so I wasn't doing a really good self-change plan. But at least in that sense. But my friends noticed that I wasn't smoking anymore, and they caught on to that, and they made very encouraging statements. Says, hey, I noticed you haven't had a cigarette in the last 4 times I've seen you. That's pretty cool. Did you quit smoking? That type of thing. So, and the answer was, yeah, I did. And they got excited about it, and then that prompted some of my other friends to quit smoking. So. It's always a good idea to include social support. It's never going to, it typically speaking, isn't going to hurt anything, and it should be one of those things that you always want to do. Oh, sorry. So self-management enters the picture when the person arranges the controlling behavior for social support to impact the target behavior. That's ultimately all we're talking about here with social support. We want to get So you, the self-manager, are going to arrange for other people to help you, right? So you arranging those behaviors is actually the self-management part. So self-talk can help you. Self-instructions involve telling yourself what to do, right? What to do and how to do it. So giving yourself particular cues. These serve as discriminative stimuli. They can kind of serve as rules as well about how to do stuff. And then, of course, self-praise, positive evaluations as you've done well, right? Or as you've done well. But it doesn't have to be perfect, right? You can be getting closer to your goal, and you don't have to actually, wait and give yourself reinforcement until you've been absolutely perfect. Encourage yourself along the way. It's definitely a good idea. Self-instructions. Identify the self-statements. Identify the time and place where they're to be used. Rehearse role-play their use in detail. You want to be able to be good at this before you actually start implementing it on a full-blown scale. And then after you've mastered your self-statements, then definitely start to use them. Self-praise. Identify the praise statements that you're going to say. Identify the behavior and the level of performance so you don't cheat yourself, right? But again, don't forget, set small goals at first and then make them bigger as you go on. Okay? And definitely avoid using negative statements. That's not very helpful. There's quite a bit of research that says, saying that, that you did a bad job or trying to self-punish. That's not a good way to go. Again, remember, you're trying to build a response here, and you want to make this whole self-changing thing as positive as possible, and that can even be along the lines of self-thought, all right, or self-talk. So let's look at how you devise this whole plan. So number 1, decide to use self-management procedures. Define the target behaviors, set your goals, go through your self-monitoring procedures, conduct a functional assessment. This is a little bit different than what we talked about before, because as you do your self-monitoring, now we need to find out what is actually maintaining the content, maintaining the behaviors, what is cueing the behaviors. In other words, what are your discriminative stimuli, what are your reinforcers, what are your punishers, and so on and so forth. Once you've done your functional assessment, then you can select the appropriate strategy for how to change the particular behavior. Then, as you've implemented your procedure, give yourself time and continue to record it, right? And see if it's been effective. So evaluate that change. And then if you're seeing that you need to make changes, then you implement those particular changes and reevaluate the self-management strategies, right? And then maintenance strategies. How are you going to generalize this to beyond your self-management plan? You don't want to have to put your self-management plan in place for the rest of your life. What you ultimately want to do is make this to where all the behaviors have been trapped and they're maintained by social or natural reinforcers. How do you decide when to use self-management? It's when you're dissatisfied, right? When you're not pleased with something that you're doing. Either you're doing too much of something or too little of something. When you wonder or imagine how your behavior could be different. And this is going to motivate you to take action, right? So again, automatically, when you decide to use self-management, that means you're going to be believing that these techniques can work. So that's a positive outcome. That's a good way to go. It sets that up, right? So defining the target behavior, we've talked about this already. Define the target so it can be recorded in detail. So it's an operational definition is what we're talking about here. The idea behind recording is to set yourself up in an appropriate self-management strategy, right? So if you don't define your behavior well, you can't get to this point. Define the competing behavior, right? The one that you're not wanting to do, or the ones that's standing in your way from achieving what you want to do. Behavioral deficit can be increased, or behavioral excess can be decreased, so on and so forth. Set your goals. Determine the level of the target behavior. Make small little steps. Don't forget to write it down. Specify the intermediate steps. That's what I was just getting at. So you set set that final goal, and then we're going to break it up into little pieces from there if necessary. Make your commitment to change, and you should be good for goal setting. But again, don't forget that whole fuzzy issue here, right? So if your goals seem fuzzy, if they're like, ooh, I want to be a better person, that's not a good goal, right? You need to define what that means. Pixel has set a goal, as you can hear, for trying to bark consistently throughout the lecture here. So I'm just going to let her go and put her on a little bit of extinction. There's nothing going on here. She's just outside barking for fun. I suppose it's the clouds, maybe. She gets a little annoyed at those things. But anyway. All right, self-monitoring. Develop and implement the self-monitoring plan. How are you going to record the behavior, right? Immediately record each occurrence of the target behavior. Set that up to where you get every single thing recorded, right? And the sooner you can record it, the better off you're going to be. Give yourself a couple of weeks to establish a baseline. The idea with baseline is stability. Once you know exactly where you're at with the behavior, and once you've recorded all those antecedent events and consequent events and all those things, then you're going to be much more successful at doing a functional assessment. Again, there we go. Behavior must be stable before you implement the change plan. Otherwise, you're never going to know if you were successful. And you don't stop monitoring. You continually monitor this. This can be one of the difficult parts of a self-management plan, is the fact that it's non-stop recording, right? You're always recording your behavior. But that's the tool that you use to decide whether or not you've been effective. Functional assessment. This is concurrent. This is going on while you're doing your self-monitoring. Conduct your FA. Refer to the previous chapters on how to do a functional assessment. But basically, all you're looking for is discriminative stimuli, so antecedents, and the punishers, reinforcers for inappropriate or appropriate behavior, whichever ones you're looking at. Again, do it for target behaviors and for competing behaviors. That way, you have the best opportunity of making this happen. And if you have the best opportunity of making it happen, that'll produce, if you're able to get all those details about what's cueing a behavior and what's maintaining a behavior, that's going to make it much more likely for your self-change plan to be effective, because you will choose appropriate strategies based on the information that you gathered during your FA. Right? So select the appropriate strategy. This is always based on your functional assessment. Don't just guess. right? So you're going to manipulate antecedent strategies that compete with the target behavior, right? You need to set yourself up for success. So presenting SDs, arranging, establishing operations, decrease response effort. This is all that stuff we talked about earlier. So removing discriminative stimuli, removing establishing operations, and increasing response effort. But these all have to be targeted to what was identified in your FA. You don't just randomly pick discriminative stimuli. You identify ones that you've worked with that have been problematic for you, or seem to cue an inappropriate behavior, or the behavior that you don't want, and now, okay, you're going to try and remove that thing. Okay, so that's kind of the idea here. It's got to be based on what you were doing in your functional assessment. Use manipulate consequent strategies. In other words, add reinforcers, add punishers. Right? So this is an interesting way to look at it, and it works really well, is to decrease undesirable behavior, to decrease undesirable and increase desirable behavior is to eliminate reinforcers, right? So eliminate the reinforcers that are available for the behavior that you don't want to do anymore. That's easier said than done. You can't really eliminate the reinforcer for cigarette smoking because it's likely the nicotine administration, but you can remove the social reinforcement, so you can smoke only by yourself or something like that. So the idea is to eliminate reinforcers, arrange punishers if needed. I tend not to like punishers so much. It's just something that I've shied away from. Some people use it very effectively. I'm not going to say it's an ineffective tool. It's just not something I prefer to go with. It's just, for me, if I try to do any sort of self-punishment or arrange a punishing contingency, that kind of just sets up for the whole, it's almost like I'm punishing the change plan or my behavior for that. And I just don't like it as much. I will use punishment with regard to a token economy, though. That's where I tend to like it the most, right? Especially for self-change. Reinforce the behaviors that you do want. So differential reinforcement alternatives. We're using DRA schedules here, DRI schedules, that type of thing. Eliminate punishment for the behaviors that you do want. Sometimes there's situations where the behaviors that you do want are punishing. So you need to think about that and make those things not happen, if at all possible. To increase desirable and decrease undesirable, arrange the reinforcers, eliminate the punishers, eliminate reinforcers for alternative behaviors, and arrange punishment contingencies for alternative behaviors. Notice that everything in here is just kind of a little bit flipped around, right, compared to the last page, because you're trying to increase desirable and decrease undesirable now. Right? Behavioral substitution techniques. All right, so BST procedures will teach to teach alternative behaviors. What can you do to come in contact with the reinforcers that already? What new thing can you do to come into contact with reinforcers that already exist and that are already maintaining other behaviors? So you're going to substitute a behavior. Finally, evaluate the change. I cannot tell you how important this is, right? Because you're going to collect data throughout the intervention. You need to decide if that's been effective. If it hasn't been effective, then you just haven't chosen the right techniques. Go back and modify a few things. Right? So if your behavior is changing in the desired direction, though, continue with the program. Don't do anything different. You're being successful. Okay? If the behavior is not changing, reevaluate. Figure out what you need to do, and go back and make some sort of change. Again, that change, just to add a little more here, that change that you do should be also based on your functional assessment. And you probably just want to try a slightly different technique. Right? So maybe your reinforcers maybe you're not reinforcing enough, maybe your goals were too big, maybe you need some intermittent goals there, or some intermediate goals there, make some smaller steps in order to achieve more success, that type of thing. Reevaluate the self-management strategies, right? Because you could have come, if you're running into problems, then there's two problems that you can hit. You didn't implement the procedures, right? Okay, so it may be beyond your skill level, so you need to use different procedures. That's fine. Right? That should, say two, but inappropriate self-management strategy, that's the one that I tend to think of as most likely the one that's happening, right? That you just chose the wrong technique for that particular behavior. That's okay. It's no big deal. It happens quite regularly. Okay. You may have implemented the procedures correctly, but you just chose the wrong one. Okay? So again, we're right back to that functional assessment. Maintenance. How do we make this stuff maintain? Right? Is the goal being achieved? If it is, then hopefully the natural contingencies are set up here and that they're actually going to take over. Right? Again, this was that cigarette smoking thing. Once I achieved my goal of not smoking and I was around my friends, the natural contingencies were that they noticed that I was not smoking and they made comments about it. And then, of course, the other natural contingencies that happened as a result were I felt better, I could exercise more, so on and so forth. And I've just felt better in general. Of course, there's always one big drawback to quitting smoking, and that's you gain a little bit of weight, but that's okay. I gained a bit of weight, and eventually I lost it, and of course now I put it back on again. But no big deal, just got to do another self-change plan. But until those natural contingencies take over, continue to set goals, right? Continue to self-monitor, and the self-monitoring I think is just a good thing to do in general. It's one of the most effective techniques you can use to change behavior across the board. Right? It provides you that feedback that will tell you whether or not you're being successful. And trust me, writing it down and graphing it is so much more effective than actually just trying to remember how much you did something. You would be surprised how inaccurate our thoughts are about how often we engage in particular behaviors. That's it for self-management, and I shall talk to you again soon.